I'm really excited to really kick off this impact session, the final session of the conference, with keynote lecture by Isha Datar, entitled Mission Cell Ag, a call to action for collective progress. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Isha. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you.
Sorry. Hello? Okay, great. I'm going to do the timer too. I thought that was a great idea. I have no idea what the ringtone is going to be. So I'm not going to be presenting any data. This is unlike any of the other talks. There's no data. This is going to be a very different type of talk. Instead, it's going to be kind of like a check-in. Thank you for mentioning that this is the 9th conference. I was curious by a show of hands if anyone was at the first conference. Okay, a few people, maybe 7 or 8 people. Okay, great. So as we know, that was 9 years ago, 8 years ago, and the field has changed a lot. The number of people in the audience has changed, the kind of motivations of the people has changed. And so I wanted to kind of check in and do kind of a temperature check of where we are and why we're here and what is motivating us. And so to me, there's kind of 4 main reasons why you might be interested in cell ag that are kind of mission-oriented reasons. Animals, I wrote them in my hand because I didn't want to forget. Animals, the environment, kind of humanity, like human health, public health, antibiotic resistance, all that kind of stuff. Someone even said to me they entered cell ag because they thought it was the only way that the cost of biomedical research would come down, which I thought was also an interesting one. And then the 4th one is food security, making sure that we can feed people in a climate change world. So I wanted to just do a quick show of hands and keep your hand up after you put your hand up. How many people are here interested in this field because they want to remove animals from the food system? Okay, it's not everyone. And how many, keep your hands up, how many people are here if you're here for the environment, sustainability, climate aspects? And how many people are here for kind of the human health, prevent epidemic viruses aspects, antibiotic resistance and so on? And then lastly, how many are here for that kind of food security? I care about feeding people in the climate change world. Okay, so almost everyone's hands are up. And so for the people who have their hands up, this talk is for you. For the people who don't have the hands up, this talk is probably not for you. And welcome to the field. You're probably one of the newer people in the field, because I think if we did that exercise 9 years ago, pretty much everyone in the audience was there because of a mission, because this is very hard work to do. And if you're trying to kind of make money or find power or fame, there's much easier ways to do that in other industries and fields. So let's talk about Mission Cell Ag. First, I want to give a little bit of background about New Harvest, because not everybody is familiar with New Harvest, believe it or not. We're a global donor-funded nonprofit organization, and our mission is to maximize the positive impacts of cellular agriculture. And I don't always talk about our vision, but I thought it was really important to share it today. Our vision is a world where that mission is realized. And so what that world looks like is that cell ag is accessible such that anyone in the world can participate in the understanding, production, and consumption of cell ag products. The second thing is cell ag has to be applicable such that cell ag technologies can be applied accordingly and appropriately to different cultures, regions, and cuisines. So cell ag, the kind of act of making these foods, can be adapted for all kinds of cultural settings, that we're not just making burgers and nuggets and kind of these processed food for kids kind of stuff. And then lastly, that cell ag is accountable, that all these claims that we make in the field that it's going to be better for the environment and animals and so on can be substantiated, and there is full transparency along the entire length of the supply chain. Because we spend a lot of time talking about cells and bioreactors and so on, but at the end of the day, something has to be grown from the sun in order for us to consume it. So we need to be thinking all the way back to what are those initial inputs into cell ag, what are those crops, where are they going to be grown, or do we like kind of the ethics of how those things are grown and so on. So I'm sharing this vision because this is our vision at our organization, and I think kind of the takeaway from this talk, which I'll give away in the first slide, is for everybody here in the audience who had their hand up to articulate your own vision of why you're in the field and what kind of world you want to see as a participant in CellAg. I will call out, I'm not really excited about the idea that CellAg creates an industry that looks like the meat industry today. I think that would be a failure of CellAg, that we have kind of 3 companies in the world producing 90% of the meat in the world, and it's all corporate consolidated. To me, cellular agriculture is this opportunity to disrupt our food system in so many different ways that if we miss that opportunity and kind of replicate the corporate structure we have of our food system today, that would be very sad. So I encourage you, if this is something that resonates with you, to stick it in your mind and keep it there as we go forward in the field, especially as the market declines, and especially even more if the market goes up, because we are going to have to weather that field and all the ups and downs together. So I'll skip through this very quickly because we just did it. Why are we here? All of us in the room are here today because we believe that cellular agriculture can radically change our global food system. We think that it can ignite this concept of a protein transition. So we talk a lot about energy transitions and how much we need to move away from fossil fuels and non-renewable resources towards kind of more diversified ways to produce energy. We need this kind of same type of thinking in protein. To me, the factory farm is the coal mine. It is very dirty and dangerous, but it absolutely gets the job done. It delivers a lot of value to people today, but will it be able to deliver value going into the future, especially when we consider that the more effective we make a factory farm, the more prone it is to risks such as, antibiotic resistance, epidemic viruses, and so on. Secondly, we're excited about CellAg because it could build resilience into our food system for that same reason, diversification of where our protein comes from. And we also have to acknowledge that the way our food system is set up right now is prone to collapse in a lot of different ways. Here is a attempt to contain an avian flu. In 2015, when we were trying to raise money for Clara Foods, something like 50 million chickens had to be culled that year because of an avian flu. That is obviously terrible for chickens, but it's terrible for people who eat chickens and eggs, and it's terrible for the farmers who had to produce all of those chickens as well. Of course, I like to remind people that we're advancing cellular agriculture in a world where agriculture is changing anyway. Like, I have this line that I drop sometimes that cellular agriculture is not going to change the world, and actually climate change is going to change the world. And so agriculture has to adapt in order to kind of keep the world going the way that we like it, to keep this kind of bounty that we have access to today. So keep this in mind, in this world where the rules of farming are changing, the regions for where things are growing are all shifting, the way you can plant certain things in different areas is changing. We need to come up with kind of more resilient ways to be producing food. I think CellAg is one of those ways, but we need it like right away. We need to be working on this right away. And last but not least, I'm most excited about CellAg because I think it gives us an opportunity to reimagine the world. If you think of that long arc of history, the world is shaped by agriculture. Like, humanity's footprint on our earth is animal agriculture. We dedicate 1/3 of our planet to growing animals for food. That is the entire size of North and South America combined. So this kind of footprint that we have on our, the one life-giving planet that we know of is really shaped by animal agriculture. And if we can create food in a different way, we actually have this capacity to reimagine how that planet is used, reimagine the world going forward, and kind of think about sustainability for humanity. I hope not until 2030 or 2050 or 2100, but for thousands more years. So we're here for all of those reasons. We think that CellAg can radically change our global food system, but we need to also acknowledge that technology on its own doesn't just kind of change stuff and have a mission behind it. It is all of us in this room, whether you are kind of a scientist in the lab or a CEO raising money or kind of an executive at a nonprofit or something like that. We all have this job of stewarding the technology towards the positive type of disruption that we want to see rather than the negative type of disruption, which is honestly usually more incentivized for. So when we think about those positive sides, yes, of course, we want to see reduced animal suffering. We want to see sustainable, healthy food. I personally would like to see CellAg be kind of a force for democratizing and decentralizing our food production. And we also want to incentivize new business and financing models in order to get there, because we have to acknowledge that our current business and financing models kind of want us to create large corporate conglomerates and kind of want us to emulate the Tyson-Cargill model of producing food. But then on the negative side, we have to acknowledge that cellular agriculture could not be pretty much either more of the same or potentially worse than the same. So it could offer less environmental, nutritional, and animal welfare benefits because there is no regulatory body that enforces those things. That is kind of up to us and our own personal missions, caring about those things that keeps that mission alive. It is not something that kind of prevents a product from going to market or anything like that. Another negative aspect is there's a lot of strong IP in CellAg. We are kind of creating a pharma-style IP environment in the food system. And so how do we feel about creating these processes where you can patent all the different pieces of the puzzle, patent the different processes of the puzzle, and really exclude people from participating in food production? You know, this is something we have to think quite deeply about. And along with that IP protection, there's also a lot of opportunity to concentrate power, wealth, and ownership when you have this incredible capacity to produce food from cells. And then last but not least, and somewhat related, there's also this opportunity to disrupt local community economies and cultural norms if we're just churning out burgers and nuggets from a factory and everyone has to rely on that one factory for burgers and nuggets. No one is smiling right now. So we're all thinking very deeply about these negative aspects because they're very real. So the question we should all be asking ourselves is, how are we going to not do that stuff? There's two big questions. How are we going to make CellAg happen? Because I still think we have to figure that out. It has not occurred yet. All these science talks over the past couple days are kind of chipping away at that problem of how do we actually make this happen? But the second question is, how do we make it good? How do we make the thing that happens actually have that kind of mission orientation that brought us all here into this field today? So if you've heard me talk like pretty much ever, you've probably heard me give this quote before. I was inspired by Carl Sagan, where he says, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. And around the time I came to this first conference 9 years ago, this was on my mind because I thought, how on earth are we going to actually deliver the value of cellular agriculture when the field can be counted on a few hands and toes, and there's kind of no incentives to actually do things that are better for animal environment and so on. And so I realized that to advance CellAg or to advance cultured meat or to make cultured meat real, it was not about multiplying cells in a lab, at least not at that very moment. Instead, it was about rallying together all the people who want to make this thing happen, creating that entire universe of scientists, investors, entrepreneurs, policymakers, et cetera, who are all united by this goal of we need to make CellAg happen because the mission is so grand that we are all going to dedicate ourselves to this very challenging technological story for the next who knows how many decades. So I'm going to skip through this New Harvest stuff just a little bit. I have started describing New Harvest as a field building organization, kind of building off of this idea that we are listening to Carl's advice of building the universe. So the first kind of work we did was kind of catalyzing the private sector. So Perfect Day and Every Food, were two companies that many people regard as the kind of the first CellAg companies that dared to make kind of commodity animal food products from cell cultures. And we helped co-found them, but after we saw there was so much excitement from the investor and entrepreneurship and startup community for all that kind of startup stuff, we said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore because that has been sparked, and it has a life of its own. Let's move on to a new kind of aspect of the field that is highly neglected. And at that time, that was academia. There were essentially no labs that were super dedicated. Well, not no. There are a few labs that were dedicated to cellular agriculture. But if you were a high school student, you couldn't just say, "Oh, I want to study this. I'll sign up to this university and enroll in this program and take these courses." So we tried to plant kind of the seeds of the public sector and get the kind of academia going. And so over the past several years, we funded a total of 60 researchers, I can't believe, at 37 institutions in 9 different countries to plant the seeds of the field. And all of those researchers are entrepreneurs in their own right, because they were studying stuff that their peers hated. They were kind of alone in this university with where lots of people had allergic reactions to them. They were kind of starting things, getting funding, convincing their PIs to care about this kind of stuff, and eventually receiving government grants and kind of building things from a very entrepreneurial standpoint, but in the academic space. And while we were kind of seeding these new leaders in the space, they were also creating the scientific foundations of the field. And I'm happy to say that so far we have over 60 peer-reviewed publications that have come out of those grants. And then most recently, we've been doing a lot of multi-stakeholder collaboration. So spark the private sector, spark the public sector, and then now spark how much they can work together and collaborate. And so we've done that a lot around safety, some stakeholder engagement with indigenous and farming communities. We're working on figuring out kind of shared infrastructure that the whole field can use together, and a lot of kind of ecosystem and private partnership grants that should bring together the private and public sectors, because they really need to work together more. And the kind of output of this New Harvest work over the past 10 years has been a lot of kind of focusing on individual empowerment such that it leads to companies being founded, kind of going and finding their own funding, going off and doing great stuff, hiring a lot of people. And then on the academic side, those researchers convincing their PIs to get in the space, and then applying for government grants and securing government funding. So we're so excited to see that the way more government funding and private investment has gone into the field than what New Harvest could have possibly imagined when we started by giving people little bits of money here and there. So I don't know if these numbers are relevant right now, but this is what I share to the policymakers, that these network effects have brought in over $2 billion in private investment, over $50 million in follow-on public investment, and over 1,500 highly qualified jobs created. So to me, this is the beginning of that universe that we're trying to build. But I wanted to kind of point out what this universe needs to look like in order for us to move forward. We need this combination of the public and private sectors, and then we need them to collaborate a lot. The public sector, of course, for any biotech field offers that foundational research, those kind of shoulders of giants that we all stand on when we are starting a company or creating a product. It creates that talent pipeline, which is going to become the hires of these companies and so on, and the independent expertise, which is so important for evidence-based policymaking or informing kind of governments in how they should be thinking about these products and how to regulate it and how to fund it and all that kind of stuff. And then the private sector does a really great job at the R&D and IP, kind of taking those technologies and scaling them and giving them to the world and making them available to people, and then of course hiring people. But there's a lot that needs to be done in the space in between. That's where we can come up with standards. That's where we can come up with standards not only for kind of safety and regulatory and kind of to spark the academic research, but we can also potentially come up with our own standards of sustainability, those kind of mission-oriented standards of what are we going to agree not to do. We've never agreed to this on paper, but I would love to. Are we going to allow FBS to be in our products? That could be something that we all agree upon kind of at a mission level, kind of like a manifesto level. These are the types of collaborations that I think would be very meaningful going into the future. And I also wanted to add in regionality. I think that vision of CellAg as being applicable to different regions is really important, and we need to have these kind of collaborative entities that think about, what does CellAg uniquely look like in the Netherlands? What does CellAg uniquely look like in Portugal? What does CellAg uniquely look like in XYZ country? So that we're creating products that are relative to that culture and relative to the food system and the way that whole food regulatory system and all that stuff works in that specific region. So the field today, what does it look like? This is from GFI's report. I would say there's about, over 150 cultured meat companies that have raised over $2.8 billion. There's over 60 precision fermentation companies that have raised over $3.6 billion. And I alluded a little bit to what we saw in the public sector, which is some millions of dollars. So it's orders of magnitude more investment in the private sector. So this is not to scale, but you know what I mean. There's a lot more money in the private sector right now than there is in the public sector. And what happens when you have a lot of money in the private sector is you have a lot of people who have to tell a story to venture capitalists, who have to tell a story to future consumers and so on, and kind of keep the hype going to keep the money coming into the private sector. So this is like a natural thing that's going to occur. I don't even blame the companies for participating in it, because it's a system-wide issue that comes from a venture capital funded world. And so we see this exact same thing happen in other types of industries, other types of sectors, where there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of siloing and duplication. So you essentially have companies doing pretty much the same thing, identical procedures from 0 to 1, hiring people, isolate cells, blah, 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 all the same stuff. And then you have a lot of IP protection around these very early stages. And if we were kind of a more established biotech field, we would have all of that basic stuff, like the access to the cells, trained talent who don't have to be trained on the job because they would have come from grad school and have already worked with these cell types for a long time. That is all happening in the private sector. So they're bearing a lot of weight in terms of money because there's no public sector to support all this training and all this kind of stuff. So we have a problem right now that we need to figure out. So where do we go from here? I don't want to talk about that. So where do we go from here? We do two things. So how do we make CellAg happen? So the first thing we have to do is grow that circle, grow that public sector circle. We need more public money in this field. That is just a fact. If we want to be comparable to any other kind of biotech or tech-enabled industry, we need to have like a proper academic system where people can go in, generate foundational research, be trained on the cell types that are relevant, be trained in the right facilities, just be churning out that public sector shoulders of giants stuff that the companies can stand upon. And I would like to call out, regional organizations. I put up Cell Agri Portugal because they did a really great event recently that kind of did a good job of all of this. These regional organizations will be critical in pulling together that government investment because they need to tell the story of why their government needs to invest in cellular agriculture. And the reason why their government invests will be very different from why another government invests in cellular agriculture. So they'll be the advocates. They should be activating institutions along the way, kind of rallying together all the different universities that are excited and kind of the talent that comes from those universities, whether they be kind of biomedical oriented, or maybe they're more fermentation oriented, or maybe they are more kind of agriculture oriented. Those institutions need to line up and get together because a lot of them don't actually bring those types of expertise in the same room. So the regional orgs are really critical for kind of rallying the troops there. And then, of course, by doing that, you establish those talent pipelines, get more people into the field, and build the foundational science on the side. But then the second thing is, okay, that's how we make CellAg happen. Here's how we make it good. And this is the kind of novel thing. And this is the thing that we don't see so much of in other sectors. And the thing that I think we're kind of forced into in this venture capital funded world that we live in. We need to grow this overlap. We need to actually expand the collaboration and force the public and private sectors together a lot more and kind of break this prisoner's dilemma that we have where the companies are all kind of doing the same thing and there's a lot of redundancy, and actually work together with the public sector to amplify the space and be a lot more coordinated. Imagine if we had strategic coordination across all the players in the field right now. And there is this openness where we say, okay, I'm going to work on this kind of cell type. This is my protocol. Put it out into the world. You try the protocol. Tell me if this protocol works. Tell me if this protocol could be improved. Imagine if we had more of that because it was either more in the public sector or that the private sector was willing to offer that up because they knew it would come back and affect them positively in the long run. That would reduce redundancy and that would help us navigate shared challenges. I feel like I need to call out a shared challenge question because I was at this conference and then a conference a week ago. I feel like there's also this almost code of silence where we don't talk about like public media articles about bad things happening in cellular agriculture, whether they are true or not. It is something that's going to affect all of us. It is not up to the marketing team of one company to talk about how, oh, our company, no, all of us are going to be affected by this bad news. And these are the types of shared challenges that we should be openly discussing amongst ourselves because the cell ag path is long and it's going to take a long time. And the more that we can weather those up and downs together, the more likely we are to achieve success. We also need to standardize a lot of the technology. I have heard so many people talk about trying to create their own cell banks independently. I've talked, so many of our researchers have experienced the same, redundancy problem. They all have to go to a slaughterhouse and isolate. So, you know, that's not necessary. You should be able to open up a book and say, I want this species, that species, and have it sent to you. So it's great there are some players that are helping that happen, but we need more of those kind of tools and toolboxes of the field to be openly accessible so the companies can focus on building stuff with the tools and toolboxes. I put in this quote, pre-industrial facility. It keeps coming up, this idea of, imagine if we had a shared place to work on scale up together. Imagine if we didn't have to rely on companies basically building facilities entirely from scratch and funding like the most expensive research project they've ever funded alone. Imagine if we had this kind of ability to scale up together and learn and, you know, generate papers along the way. And then lastly, we should standardize impact. We should come together, create these manifestos, create these kind of processes for evaluating impact, the LCAs and so on, the things that we are going to hold ourselves to, because no regulatory body is going to hold ourselves to it, but the media and potentially consumers may want to hold ourselves to it in the future. So if we can get ahead of that and make sure that we can back up our claims and we've set up the systems to back up our claims, we will have done ourselves a lot of kind of marketing ahead of time. So what is my call to action? Oh, I don't have data, but I have one paper you can read. If you haven't read this paper, I would encourage you to read that, especially if you consider yourself to be a mission-driven scientist or participant in the field. Dwayne and the team at New Harvest put together this lovely article which talks about how the evolution of cellular agriculture and especially the race to cultured meat would be different if we centered the mission. And so these are kind of the 5 bullet points to take away. Please read it. It should be the thing that kind of keeps you centered in the work that you're doing. And here's a QR code to have open access to it. And that is all for my talk, my rambling for today.
Do we have questions?
There's John.
Oh. Where? All the way in the back.
Oh my gosh. We should have a culture of collaboration of throwing this ball, like, you know.
Thanks, Isha, for the talk. Very, very cool. I just had like recently just a thought and no opinion, but what about, like, I just had the thought, like, what if these companies, if they didn't try and stretch, I'm not saying lie, I think just maybe stretch the truth and say like we're coming out with a product in 2 years, when actually it's maybe closer to 10 years. Would they just have never gotten funding to do the development work to actually like make the technology a reality?
That's why I don't want to blame people, because I think the system is bad for advancing mission-driven technology. Like, I feel like the way that things have evolved in this field is exactly the way that the system has set up for. Like, you know, we co-founded those companies in the beginning because venture capital was the only type of money who would even dare to support the kind of concept of growing food from cells. So that is, it's nobody's fault. It's just that's the way it's set up. So now that we're in it and we have maybe a little more power or access to resources than we did in the beginning, we should try and steer ourselves to try doing new and different things.
We have one question in the back here.
I don't want to break the camera. Okay, it fell apart. Okay, thank you for your talk. Yeah, at this moment, it's also a reality that a lot of spin-offs roll out of university and they protect their IP. So how to tackle that problem?
Oh, I wish I knew how to tackle the university IP problem. I don't. We tried to, when we were funding our researchers, we tried to have a very, even just not even an IP thing, but a focus on open access publications. And even that's hard to enforce at like 100% level. It's, when I say, like, I don't want to sound doomsday-ish, but like when I say that the structure incentivizes kind of the wrong things, I mean all aspects of it. Like, I think we're used to universities having this kind of sense that they're this like open and free place where you can, you know, do all these creative things, but they're also kind of corporations that require a return on their IP. So I have no good answer for you, unfortunately. I mean, that's why people want to do their own thing completely outside of universities and secure VC funding. I think what we can do is like dare to be honest, especially with venture capital and kind of private funders, because at the end of the day, they are also just individual people that you are convincing to support a thing. And there are some really great funders who are like patient, who understand how the science happens and all that kind of stuff. I feel like the more honest we are about the technical challenges ahead and the kind of ways we need to adapt in order to get this research funded, you know, the better off we're all going to be.
And we have time for one more question in the front.
Oh, brutal. It's right on my hands. Thank you, Isha, for the great talk. I have a question about the pre-industrial facility thing that you were talking about. So I think that we are starting to see some of those like styles of things crop up. And the ones that I know of are like, there's like the collaboration between, I think, Givaudan and Buehler Group. And then I think JBS just sort of announced something like that in Brazil. And so I'm just curious your thoughts, because that kind of like, it's the thing you want maybe in the place that you don't want it.
Well, I don't want to say I don't want, you mean I don't like Switzerland?
No.
Or you mean that I don't like that it's
the big
big companies.
I meant that you don't like Switzerland. No. It's like the big it's the current really large entrenched food corporations.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't like Switzerland. The flag is too square. No, but I think that the entrenched corporation thing is okay, because we've actually seen one of our board members worked at the Basel Institute of Immunology, which was funded by, I think, Roche or some giant corporation. But it was a very openly designed institute, which was meant to be this very creative space where people were working, collaborating. Everything was very accessible and published. You know, there have been precedents where private companies have created exactly the thing that I'm talking about. You know, these kind of places where you can innovate and scale and do all these things in a very kind of generous way. And the impact is not always like, just a patent that you're going to license, you're going to make money off that thing tomorrow. It's not so small. The impact is probably similar to that New Harvest web, where it kind of goes on and on and on, but ends up being very, very impactful in the long term, because like a lot of people found companies, or a lot of people rely on the technology that comes out of it. So I don't say I'm writing off companies, or I'm writing off this structure, or VCs, or anyone. I'm just saying we all can potentially, in our different roles, do things differently. And there's actually been a lot of precedent for doing things more openly and differently in the past that has churned out a lot of great science and created a lot of stuff that has publicly benefited a lot of people, especially in medicine. So we just have to do it. We just have to decide to do it. That's all.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.